President Biden has now signed his executive order undoing President Trump's ban on transgender service in the United States military. But that doesn't mean that the battle is over, the civil rights battle for transgender members of the military. So I wanted to speak with Zeke Stokes, who is a Democratic strategist, formerly a vice president with GLAAD and founder of ZS Strategies. Zeke, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So I think people tend to imagine, and maybe I'm wrong about this, I think people tend to imagine that the way this works is Biden snaps his fingers and then poof, the military transforms overnight into a welcoming, inclusive place for not just serving transgender members of the military, but also new recruits. Can you disabuse me of that if I'm wrong about that? And if so, talk a little bit about what kind of issues still lie ahead regarding transgender service in the military?
Sure. Well, actually, in ordinary times, you might be incorrect about that, but you actually are sort of on the money there. It is a little bit of a snap of the fingers, and that's because prior to Donald Trump imposing this ban in 2017 when he became president, a ton of work had gone into lifting the transgender ban under former President Obama. In fact, the Department of Defense had done a study back in 2016 that showed that having open trans service would be neither compromising to military readiness, unit cohesion, or any of the other things that make our military strong. So a lot of the work had been done. And in fact, the service chiefs and the Department of Defense had in fact said to President Obama, we can do this. And it was very much underway when Donald Trump took office and actually undid it with the snap of his fingers, otherwise known as an executive order.
And so in terms of what this means right now, I think the biggest sort of impact is someone who is transgender can now join the military again. But I would imagine sorry, go ahead.
No, that's exactly right. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, but I don't think we've heard as much about what kind of experience have the existing transgender serving members of the military had during the entire Trump administration, both leading up to his order, his ban, as well as in the time since then and after it was implemented. What has that experience been like for those people serving their country, serving in uniform, who were transgender?
Well, you can imagine it's been incredibly disruptive. They were in many cases beginning to serve openly. You know, we've had about 138,000 transgender veterans who've served our military over the years, and we've got about 15,000 or so serving right now. So a lot of those folks were serving, beginning to serve openly, beginning to come out to their unit leaders and their comrades when Donald Trump really reversed this very quickly in 2016. So in a lot of ways, those who are currently serving have been left in limbo. And a lot of these are service members on the front lines doing really, really important jobs to keep us safe here at home and abroad. So what this does is finally allows them to sleep at night knowing that they're not going to get kicked out tomorrow for being their authentic selves, for serving openly and honestly. And it allows other brave patriots across our country, transgender patriots who may want to serve in our military, to enlist. It's also going to do one more thing, and that is take a look at any service members who were discharged under this Trump policy. Take a look at their service records and their discharge records and correct those, and if needed, and try to make those wrongs right again.
And if I remember correctly, and again, please correct me, the Biden's executive order and the White House statement explicitly said, I am ordering a review of all these disposition reports and reports on transgender members of the military, their status and whether or not they were discharged or any of those things. That was a very conscious, explicit part of this. So what does that mean now for the people whose status is now going to be reviewed? Do we have a sense of what that looks like for them?
In some cases, when someone's discharged from the military, they get something called a DD 214, and it outlines all of the circumstances of your discharge. And in some cases, these service members may have been discharged in a way that would allow them to re-enlist. So there may have been no other mitigating factors except for the fact that they came out as transgender. Now, the reality is, I don't believe there were many transgender discharges during this period of time, because these service members, 15,000 or so of them, had already begun to serve openly. They were out to their commands. They were doing a lot of important work for our military. And so suddenly discharging 15,000 trans service members would have been incredibly disruptive to our military. The very thing that President Trump at the time said he was trying to avoid was disruption to the military. But in the cases that there were discharges that were unjust and shouldn't have happened, President Biden, as you said, has ordered a review, and hopefully those can be corrected. In some cases, those folks may not be in a position in their lives where they want to rejoin, re-enlist, but in some cases they may, and they ought to have the opportunity to do that.
It sounds like you're saying that their integration, right, into their individual units as well as the institution of the military was fairly good, right? That it would have been disruptive to uproot them, because the military had, if not institutionally, officially, on a ground level, accepted these folks and or didn't care, maybe in some cases didn't know. But right now, especially post January 6th, we're also looking at issues of whether there are strains of violent extremism within the military. So we're talking about kind of a range. It's a vast institution, obviously. We're talking about a range of cultural and social folks who are within the military. What's the transgender experience been like, either before, during, and now after the Trump ban, in terms of acceptance by this institution, which has all of these cliches and cultural tropes about it, a lot of which are tightly connected with toxic masculinity, right? So I'm curious where the experience has been along that sort of range.
Well, I don't want to speak for trans service members to their own personal lived experiences, because I haven't had those experiences myself, so I can't do that. Sure. But I will say there's been a big range of experiences. I co-produced a film in 2018 called Trans Military. We followed a number of transgender service members and veterans through the course of their service and their discharges over the course of about 5 years. When Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed back in 2011, it did not cover trans service members, so that fight was very separate. So I worked on this documentary with a number of amazing colleagues, and we followed these trans service members, some of whom were serving openly in Afghanistan even before the ban was lifted during the Obama years. They were out to their commands, they were doing important jobs, and they were serving very successfully and very honorably. And I think the core message that we need Americans to hear and others to hear is that trans people can serve our military openly, authentically, and with the same level of capability and outstanding service as any other service member, and they ought to be able to do it without discrimination.
One thing we heard a lot about, including falsely, if I remember correctly, from President Trump, was this notion that the healthcare costs attached to any given transgender service member were vastly out of proportion with the rest of the force, the military, mm-hmm. and that's the study, from my paltry reading on this, the study you referred to back in 2016 sort of debunked that notion years ago, as far as I'm aware, or maybe it was more recently. But I'm curious what your thoughts are about how that came to be such a talking point, to the extent that I think it actually still has some power, at least on the right today.
Yeah, I think this trans military ban that Trump initiated didn't happen in a vacuum. It was a part of a larger effort to target trans people and other marginalized communities by the Trump administration. And this healthcare talking point just became a bit of a convenient talking point that really played into a lot of fears and misinformation among Americans. But the fact is, as you stated, that the 2016 study by the Department of Defense showed I think the increased cost to healthcare service, overall healthcare service or healthcare for service members with open trans service would have been 0.001%. tiny, minuscule piece of support for these service members. And that's one of the bargains, in fact, that we make with Americans when they join our military, that we're going to take care of their healthcare, we're going to take care of their families, and in return, they're going to serve and protect our country and fight, and in some cases die for us. So healthcare is the least we can do for these brave service members, and that point that you made from the former president was, as he might like to say, just fake news.
Does this feel to you like if, let's say, a Republican, a Tom Cotton, someone relatively mainstream Republican for today, becomes president in 2024, does this feel to you culturally like something the Republican Party is poised to try again? Or have we reached sort of a tipping point, as we do with a lot of these social movements that you've been involved in, where Republicans end up sort of coming around and the culture fight moves on to something else? How do you feel like, what's the status for 2024, would you say? Just quickly give a guess.
I don't think we're going to have to revisit this again. The military has always paved the way for larger social change. If you look at desegregating the ranks racially, if you look at women in the service academies, if you look at Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal, those things preceded other big leaps in social justice and equality. And I think we'll see that case here as well.
That's a great point. Zeke Stokes, thanks for joining us. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.